We are back
Hello.
with André Breton. Did I say that right?
Yeah, I think so.
And what is that accent? What's that little accent on the E?
Yeah.
Is it an accent aigu?
This is correct, yeah.
I got
Did
it
you
right. Look at
research
that. Accent aigu.
Did you
It's the only
research
thing I
it?
remember from French because it sounded so funny.
Oh. I never. Well, maybe I did take French.
Mm.
My husband took Chinese for 4 years. Weird, right?
What?
Yeah.
Like Mandarin or what?
Not Mandarin.
Chinese.
Chinese.
Okay.
And he can only now say one sentence, and it's so funny when he says it because he says it with like the whole accent, and the sentence is your boyfriend's penis resembles a small chopstick. That's the only thing he's retained.
Wow, 4 years.
4 years of Chinese. He's like, why did I take Chinese in high school?
That's weird.
That's a lot of
Yeah,
work.
he went to a school in Oklahoma that had a lot of really interesting foreign languages. So
It's
Well, that's
in
real
there.
fun.
It's in there somewhere.
Speaking
That's
of
the good
foreign
news.
languages, this is Andre's second time on.
I know Andre's
right.
back, and here's why.
Yes, he's back.
Because he doesn't give short answers.
Back
We
again.
got so excited about Andre's life and childhood that we missed out on the tour situation.
Correct, which is the whole reason we came here.
I know.
Le Tour d'Europe.
And I have so many questions.
So many
and
questions.
I want to hear about it. So
Yeah.
Andre gets a second round.
That's right. Round 2. So
Super
let's
fun.
start with what made you think it was a good idea to ride from Scotland, which if there was a map here of Europe, Scotland would be up here, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Duncansby Head.
You're off the camera.
Duncansby Head.
There you go.
That's right.
Get down in
right there
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
to like here, Istanbul, Turkey.
Yeah,
Ish.
but instead take a well-cooked piece of spaghetti and then throw it up against this because
And then that's
in
where
reality
you
it
had
was
to go.
it was like this.
Let's do some of the numbers first, just so people understand the extremity of what you did.
Okay.
So, how many miles?
4,392. According to the satellites, these numbers are always susceptible to measurement error when it's satellites above the Earth, but that number should be very close.
Give or take. Okay.
Yeah.
How many days?
63 days. We can say that for sure.
Okay. And how many actual days of riding?
51 days on the bike.
Okay.
How many hours a day would you ride?
On a day that it wasn't interrupted by a ferry boat, and there were many of them as I made my way through the UK and Ireland, it would be a minimum of 7 and maybe as many as 10.
Oh, that's a good question. Do those miles include ferry rides?
No, I didn't include the ferry boats.
So the miles is actual pedaling.
Correct.
Actual human power.
So 7 to 10 hours on a bike a day.
Oh.
And
Does
how
your
many-
ass not hurt after a while? Does it just get numb?
Gets used
Well,
to probably.
the bike, I've used several bike kits. So the bike kit is this outfit that you see cyclists wearing on the street, right? So it's typically Lycra, I think, anyway.
Very flattering.
It could be. We hope so. Just keep riding it. It'll eventually get flattering, perhaps.
Okay.
So it's tight fitting, but most important in this kit is the padding in the bib. So the lower part, the part that actually rubs up against your butt and your junk.
Your junk.
Especially your
Accentuate.
butt.
We call that the groinable, crotchable area.
Yeah. So I'm using kits from a company called Primal. They somewhat, discount sort of thing, sponsor my grassroots team, Northern Colorado Grassroots here in Fort Collins. Those kits are exceptional. I would say they're a little on the heavy side for long distance, but I race with them as well.
Sure.
But I had 2 kits, 2 sets, so 2 bottoms, 2 tops for that entire tour.
No
Wow.
way.
And, yeah.
Gross.
2 outfits.
Yeah. I didn't know. I started with 3 actually, but one I wore it a couple times and it was just worn out from
Shit
go.
the bed, so you left it on the side of the road.
I actually recycled it. Yeah. So those 2 Primal kits were exceptional. Now, I did develop saddle sores that's inevitable.
Oh.
And
what's that like?
Oh, that's
well, so what happens
do we really
is
want to hear?
Yeah.
I mean,
what happens
I
is
don't need the description of
I
the
won't
color,
get. Well, I never
but-
saw them actually.
Oh,
You know,
there
you'd
you
have
go.
to. You know, you'd have to get really funky in a mirror to. But you know what they. You sort of imagine what they look like. But
Yeah.
within 20 minutes, they go numb.
Oh, so then it's just.
oh, that's fun.
But they can get much worse.
Yeah.
Mine didn't, thanks to these kits. The quality of the padding in particular.
What kind of padding is it? Like chamois, or do you use gel?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the material is that Primal uses to build their.
Okay, well we'll
Their
find out.
pads,
We'll put notes in the comments. That'll be
Yeah.
fun.
By the way, I don't use any. For example, there's a product called Butt Butter.
Mm.
I figured you'd like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Butt Butter. I don't use any product like that. I only use the pad from the bib. So.
Okay. So what?
Maybe
I
a
guess
bit
going back to the original question. So and you did what? 200,000 vertical feet. Is that correct?
It was over 230,000, which that's equivalent to starting at the ocean, at sea level, and climbing Mount Everest a little more than 7.5 times. So Mount Everest is 29,029 feet. A very easy number to remember. So
That's
Wow.
really crazy.
I did that almost 8 times.
Yikes.
That's wild.
So where did this whole idea of riding from almost the northernmost tip of Europe, is that correct?
The north. It's not quite the northwestern, but
Northwestern-ish.
it's in the vicinity. It's
Okay.
the northeastern point. Duncansby Head is Land's End, northeastern point of
Okay.
Scotland.
Okay.
You can't go any farther without a boat.
I like how you say Scotland. I don't know if that's
I
your...
love,
even noticed.
I love Scotland. I've been
Yeah,
all
me
over
too.
Scotland, and it's exactly like it looks in the pictures. It's beautiful. There's
Sure is.
waterfalls everywhere. It's green. The people are nice. There's
Haggis.
sheep on the road. There's
It's
haggis. There's, two one lane goat trails that are considered roads, and it's pretty spectacular.
It sure is. It's an inspiration, isn't it? I mean,
It
Nice.
is.
Just inspired to be outside there.
It's a different way of life. People
For sure.
move a lot slower there. It's just it's a lot more relaxed. Pretty neat.
So,
So yeah,
What was your
made you
inspiration?
choose these areas?
Yeah.
This path.
Why? Well, the overarching idea of the tour was to cross the European subcontinent by bicycle. Now, I could have started in London, for example, and ridden essentially east-southeast, almost directly to Istanbul. And that's pretty much the standard, how folks do a similar Europe across Europe to Istanbul. Istanbul, by the way, is on the west. Well, some of it's on the east side of the Bosphorus. The Bosphorus is a strait between the Black Sea and the Sea of Marmara. It's not a river; it's a strait, just like Gibraltar, connecting the Atlantic and the Med. So Istanbul does spill over on both sides, but otherwise, on the west side of the Bosphorus, that's the edge of the European subcontinent.
okay.
And then why start? So why did I start in Scotland? Well, another primary ambition of this tour, more so than even any of my other tours, because those tours taught me began to show me what was possible on these journeys. I began to think a lot more about opportunities to interact with locals, etc., and how to make that happen. So this other idea was to celebrate the journey. And we often get caught up in where we need to be, such as I sometimes wonder how many bike riders have been run over because somebody was trying to get to their lunch or their dinner reservation.
For sure. They're checking their tweet.
Yeah. So
Tweet checkers.
So my point here is that we are all susceptible to not taking slowing down a little bit, focusing on what's important. Now, I crossed the European subcontinent in 51 days of riding, 63 days total, and people might say, well, gosh, Andre, you ought to slow down. But why I took that many days is another question. But nonetheless, getting back to this idea of celebrating the journey, I wanted to make sure I did that. So this is partly why I started in Scotland And I started the first day, I rode west. And the second day, I rode west for half of that day. And Istanbul's pretty solid east of Scotland, right?
And definitely south, for sure.
And then I rode south until I got to a ferry port at Ullapool, Scotland.
What was it called?
Ullapool.
That's awesome.
And I got on that ferry boat, and I want to say that ferry ride, I was on many of them, so forgive me, but I want to say that was most of 3 hours. And that boat took me farther west to the Outer Hebrides, to Stornoway and the Isle of Lewis. So now I'm still going west, and then from there I began to go south. Basically no longer west, but south, and I would go south, many ferry boats, zigzagging my way eventually to the southern part of Ireland. Now, I'm in Ireland, and I'm trying to go to Istanbul. Again, that's kind of insane. So, as you see, and I won't go all the way through the tour at this point, but this beginning part of the tour demonstrates my strategy for making sure that I celebrated the journey. I forced myself by the route to do that.
Not the easiest route.
Exactly.
There were easier ways of doing this particular journey, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You can use bike trail. You can use like the Eurovelo is one of the major bike trails in a bikeways, pass, etc. It's a combination of infrastructure, but a lot of it is a path, and you can pretty much cross Europe on that.
No way.
EV6.
Wow, that sounds fun.
There's some exception, but a lot of folks hang on that EV6 for a long time.
How much did you ride on it?
I actually did get on it eventually, and I'd have to really look back into my files to figure out where that was. But I thought about it when I was on it. But it was a long time before I actually accessed it. I was well inside of the main part of Europe when I came across it.
And what was it about going west and essentially riding away from your target that felt like a celebration to you?
Well, anything that's difficult tends to give more back than, say, the simplest things in life. That's partly why I resist the couch, and I would argue that for some,
as in you don't own one or you don't get on it.
I try to avoid settling into a couch in general. Now, the couch is an interesting
in general.
The couch is an interesting so I have this idea that
it comes from a French word, right? You knew that.
It sounds quite French, doesn't it?
It means to relax.
There's a comedian who does a whole
totally
bit
kidding.
on his couch.
I don't know shit about where the word couch came from.
I think the couch was inevitable. I think the way human beings function, their minds, like just when they disconnect and go on cruise control, it made the couch inevitable. We all want to sit on the couch and do nothing.
I want to sit on the couch right now.
I get that, right?
I slept on the couch this morning.
It's so comfortable. You can bring a coffee, etc. I try to avoid that, and instead I go after.
I see your first piece of merchandise, André Breton. Avoid the couch.
Yeah,
it's a T-shirt.
Yep, for sure.
I'm about to move to Durango and to a studio apartment, and I have no furniture.
Are you gonna sleep on a couch?
I don't know.
He's gonna sleep on the floor.
It's such an interesting concept. I've never heard anybody say that they try to avoid the couch.
Yeah, so if you challenge yourself in life, then this idea of celebrating the journey becomes inevitable because you're inevitably stuck in the difficult space of accomplishing whatever that is. So if you want to be sure that you're going to have an interesting bike tour, don't take the straight line. Take some convoluted route. Now, mine was biased with some desires that I had. Now it's my tour. I guess I can do what I want, right? But nonetheless, I felt like I added a few selfish details, and one was I'd never been to the Outer Hebrides.
Okay.
So I wanted to go there. And let me back up and say, like you, Jenna, I had been to Scotland a few times, and I also had gotten into my heart. That was why I started in Scotland.
It's so beautiful.
I like the cows in Scotland. The big hairy ones.
They're the Highland cattle.
Yeah.
When when I was, the thing that got me in Scotland the most was, first I went with my mother which I love my mom, but 17 days in Scotland with my mom as a newlywed was like, this is exciting. And I also chose that time to quit smoking cigarettes, and so it was ridiculous.
Nice combo.
So we were driving, and we pulled over just to take a break and like look at this creek, and there was this little old man there, and he came up and he started reciting poetry to us. Just like on the side of the road, and he was
with
so
his
cute.
Scottish brogue.
Yeah, and he had on like a little wool sweater vest, and like he was just this Scottish dude reciting poetry. And
the Scottish leprechaun.
It's kind of like that sets, you get into Edinburgh and some of the cities, and it's different, but like that's the tone of Scotland is like little cute old men reciting poetry.
If you were gonna recite poetry on the side of the road, Andre, what poem would it be?
I'll confess, despite there is a very famous now long ago past poet, a surrealist poet. You haven't come across him, I gather, but his name was literally André Breton.
Oh, really?
And again, he is very famous. But for me in life, I've never developed
a passion for poetry.
Yeah, I have a deep respect for it, just like the Grateful Dead. That was never, to me, it was a band that I never quite understood.
You never saw Ken on Lot at the Dead shows.
Those long jam sessions that they went on, they never quite, pulled me in. But
I'll give you a suggestion.
Okay.
Go listen to American Beauty.
All right.
Go listen. Working Man's Dead. Listen to that.
All right.
Go listen to those albums.
That's one of my favorite songs of all time.
You'll grow a new appreciation.
But I get it.
Anyway,
I get it too. I'd struggle with the poetry.
Yeah, poetry is definitely an acquired taste, I think.
For sure.
It's coming.
But it was just this.
Yeah.
There's something about the essence of poetry that is
and
kind of magical.
You're in Scotland, and there's a man reciting poetry, so yeah, cool.
It does.
I get it.
Scotland gets into your heart, for sure.
So you get to go and have... So I'm wondering what the quotient of like...
Quotient?
Yeah, quotient of difficulty versus experiencing the journey. Like, how do those things meet? Like, is it 50% difficulty makes it better? Or like the harder it is, the better it is? Like the more miserable you are, the better it is?
Well, I would say I was almost... It was unusual that I was miserable.
Okay, good.
And very little time spent in that space.
That's good.
There was a climb in Serbia where I definitely slipped into that for a short time, but then things flipped into this wonderful lodging experience for €20 that included dinner and breakfast on the top of a mountain in an old ski lodge.
Nice.
So when you push yourself, interesting things happen for sure. I don't know what the math is on that. I think for me, one thing about these bike tours is I don't do an enormous amount of planning, in part because that's just the way I am.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also recognized that if I leave a lot of questions unanswered, obviously not the most important ones, like I needed a visa for Turkey. You're not going to get into the country without that.
For sure.
But I find if I leave some things non-concluded, can I say that?
Yeah.
Unknown.
Then
sure.
These really interesting by chance experiences come along.
Yeah.
So on this, let me back up and say I wanted to go to the Outer Hebrides selfishly because I'd never been there. I wanted to go to Ireland, in Northern Ireland, because I'd never been there.
Cool.
So hence the initial part of the tour. So before I got to France, which one could argue I could have started in Paris, and a lot of people do, I had already ridden most of 2,000 miles.
Wow.
And an enormous amount of climbing because I'd come through the Northwest Highlands and then the Highlands just south of that include the Inner Hebrides. I'd ridden over a few ranges in Ireland, and then I'd ridden through some mountains in Wales. And Wales is, straight up, straight down. It's similar to Belgium in the Ardennes, for example, where I'd crossed through a few years before on a different tour. People get the impression that these places are relatively flat, but these relatively small hills have a super deep, strong bite. So
They're
I
pretty
had,
aggressive in terms of
well,
their...
you're screaming downhill on the bike, right? And you're
Yeah.
loaded up, and you don't. Of course, every inch of this bike tour, every inch I have never been to.
I know.
Wow, that's so cool.
Wow.
You're coming around the next corner, and you don't, and especially when you're on fairly rough track, which I was never hesitant to. Well, on this tour, I was a little hesitant to get on some of it, but I rode on a lot of rough tracks. So
you were riding a mountain bike, is that right?
a gravel bike.
Gravel bike.
Yeah. So I'll tell you just.
Is that like a cross? Like a cyclocross bike?
A lot of people just simply refuse to call it a gravel bike because it really is so similar to a cross bike.
Oh, weird.
So this is the last few years, gravel bikes have become super popular. They share a lot in common with a cyclocross bike, such as they have disc brakes.
Okay.
Because if you're going to ride a bike on gravel or dirt roads, if you like, your bike's going to get super dirty. So like a mountain bike, it has disc brakes typically. And the bike that I used, and I have used on all my tours, which now has, I bought it in 2016. I bought it from Niner Bikes in Fort Collins, where they're based, and they're very generous to my NCGR, Northern Colorado Grassroots. So if there's anybody for me to thank for making these trips possible.
But it's not some fancy like special bike. It's just a bike that you bought off the rack that you had built.
Right. So I bought a standard RLT9 steel from them, and the first few tours I just rode it. I put some bags on it, and learned the hard way what worked didn't. And this last tour, I had friends at Brave New Wheel in Fort Collins not only coach me on, in particular, a lighting system from Sine Wave.
Ooh, that's fun.
Which turned out to be absolutely brilliant, I tell you. When I was on the Outer Hebrides, I had been getting absolutely annihilated by wind and rain since I'd taken a left at Durness. Durness is at the top of Scotland, the northwest side, top of Scotland. So I'd ridden across the top from Duncansby Head, and I turned left, and I turned into a gale. And eventually, a few miles later, I started to climb the first climb. Basically, now I'm climbing into the Highlands. And the good news is, going back to this idea about being miserable, I had so much reserve at that point. I'd been done. I had stopped racing about 2 weeks before. That was a huge part of the year, but I'll just set that aside there for a moment. But I had accumulated some rest between. So when I turned into that gale, and then partway up that climb, it started pissing down rain, and it wasn't that warm. I was in good shape to deal with it.
Sure.
But within a few days of that, now I'm on the Outer Hebrides. I'm looking for a window of no wind, and so I'm scanning the app that I'm using at that time. And at 3:00 in the morning, so I'm jumping ahead here, but I decide to depart at 3:00 in the morning from one particular place on the Isle of Lewis because the wind's going to be down, and I do that. 3:09, I go through the gate. I say bye to the sheep at the hostel. They're the only ones up, and I ride into the dark. And this sine wave headlight with the dynamo on my front wheel that Brave New Wheel installed for me, I could see the sheep looking at me. I could see them in front, but on the side, left and right. And I saw
it was so bright.
I saw 3 vehicles in the next 3 hours. And it was some of the most fun I've had as an adult in my whole life. It was so much fun, yeah.
And it wasn't raining, and it wasn't
raining, and the wind was basically zero as it was predicted. And when the sun came up, I was on top again of the Highlands. So the Highlands are aptly named. You don't just climb up a mountain in the Highlands and then descend. You climb up, and you're up there, and you stay up there, and you dip and dive and roll. But if the weather's bad, of course, you're up on a high plateau.
Yeah.
Can't see shit.
And you're getting very much abused, right? But on the Isle of Harris, when the sun came up, I was back on the Highlands, and the view was amazing. And there were red deer, males with giant antlers, crossing the road, and sheep everywhere.
Cool.
And pretty much just me.
Yeah.
And that sine wave light just really made
the
made
old
it
red deer.
Do you stop in those moments and like pause to capture
smell the
them?
roses?
In this particular, I definitely backed off going over the top, but there's always temperature regulation, right? So if I back off too much, I get cold. I need to put something on. So once you warm up and you take something off and you get into a space that's comfortable, I tend to try to keep it there unless it just becomes easy. If it warms up, it was still morning, so it was cold. Then I can be a little more flexible with that.
Yeah.
Eventually, I'm taking pictures, of course, but I try to minimize that too.
I feel like that would be my problem. I have a photographic memory, and I'm such a like Ken said, stop and smell the roses type person. I like to absorb those moments. I end up I don't even have a lot of pictures of things because I stop to enjoy it. I would probably stop way too much, I think.
Well, I don't know if this would have come up, but you just reminded me of a thought I often have, and I'll share it with you. When people look at the distances I travel, friends of mine, they sometimes suggest that I might be missing a lot along the way. So, for example, I didn't go past Rome, but use that famous example. Maybe I'm 100 miles from Rome, and I go around it. Well, I go around big towns typically because they're super dangerous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
On a bike.
Yeah.
But is it true that I miss something? Well, here's the experience that I have. I think is one that presents literally everything to me. So it's true I'm not stopping a lot. It's true I'm not going to the primary sites, although sometimes I do. So I went into Verona twice. That place was amazing.
Yeah.
I had such it was and honestly I pedaled in and out of that city without hardly any concern for my safety. I found it very cycle friendly. But what do you get on the bike? You get every moment, every fraction
Just
of
in
every
your
second,
face.
Yeah.
you are in the space.
Yep.
You are experiencing every second of the way, and you can do it in a time frame that isn't years or a lifetime. Do you want to cross Europe by? Sure, if you walked, that would be even more of that.
Sure.
But you can do it on a bicycle and get a large part of that package.
Yeah. It's so true.
In a much shorter time.
There's something so magical about being on a bicycle. I'm sure it's similar on a motorcycle.
Yeah, I mean, you're going faster, so you don't. But yeah, it's
but
different
you're
than
just
being in a
in
car.
it.
You smell, it's like I always use the example of, riding through like the inner part of Central California, and it's like you smell the cilantro fields, you smell the garlic fields, you smell smell all those things because you're riding through it, and you're experiencing it.
Well, what do you when you're in that, what goes through your mind? Do you find yourself still in the mind? Do you find yourself talking to yourself? Are you working through problems?
All of the above.
Yeah.
And a journey this long. But one of the things I am fascinated by is geography. Especially, I love to go over big rivers. So on this journey, for example, I saw a new face of the Rhine. As a youngster, not only in the last podcast, I talked about standing tiptoed on a cast iron radiator and onesie, looking out the window at Peck Street Hill and wondering what was beyond that hill. That's where my curiosity and my wanderlust, at least in my memories, began. Shoot, I lost my train of thought there.
But seeing the Rhine from a
Thanks.
different perspective.
Yeah, so I had seen the Rhine on my bike journeys, crossing Europe on a half dozen occasions. But when I arrived to Liechtenstein, the Rhine was turquoise because it was so close to the mountains. And a lot of the rivers were that color because they have calcium carbonate from the glaciers that still persist in the Alps for how much longer, we're not sure, but hopefully a bit longer. So when I come across rivers of great fame, where so many stories are lost and so many have been told. It really, I don't. Well, I generally do take some pictures, but it slows me down internally for sure. And this applies to being on the high plains in France or along the Loire River that I travel. In France, I was in France for about 640 miles. It took me several days to cross it. And through that experience, I wrote through all sorts of landscapes. So I'm often thinking about the bedrock geology. I'm thinking about the ecology of the forest.
Yeah.
I'm curious
That's
about
so great.
the river. So I've had a bit of a passion for sedimentary geology and earth history, so I'm thinking about that stuff. Kind of dark,
This is the first time those words have ever been uttered together.
I know.
A bit of a passion for sedimentary geology.
I'm curious how the planet Earth was put together, and then of course you can't stop there. You start going out into the solar system and beyond our solar system.
Did you ride much at night in the dark?
I rode into the dark into the evenings on a few occasions, just because I typically stop between 4:30 and 5:30, and I try to book something.
Yeah.
So my bookings, out of 63 nights, I probably booked in advance, which would have been the day before, 10 times, and the rest of them were the same day.
And what were you using?
First, I would go to Airbnb, because a lot of lodging opportunities are now converging on that app. So, for example, in France, there are these. There's a system of spaces where where you can stay. They're called a gîte, and they have their own app and their own website, and so you can look there for possible lodging opportunities. In Serbia, you'd be looking for SOBE, SOBE, or in English, you'd be looking for a guest house. In these spaces, there are other ways to search for them other than Airbnb, but some of them are on Airbnb. So I would start there.
Okay.
And then work my way eventually to the Google map, and I'd type in a keyword and hit search, like guest house. And if that didn't work, then I might go into a village and go into a restaurant or a bar, because they tend to know people. And if that didn't work, I was carrying a bivy sack, a ground pad, and a quilt, which is a light sleeping bag.
Yeah, so if you had to...
How many times did you sleep outside?
I slept in that one time.
Wow.
Nice.
So,
do you wish that you had... Were you glad you had it, or would that be something you wouldn't take again?
I was absolutely glad that I had it.
Were there other times you used it where you'd like rest on the side of the road or anything? Did you ever rest in the middle of the day? Like nap?
I did not. No, I used caffeine.
Napping is like a couch. Napping is a couch.
Yeah. I mean, there's a time and place for everything. I just think
he brought a couch.
But napping is not. There's no time or place for napping.
Did you stop to eat? Or were you just
yeah.
hitting those energy gel cubes on the side of the road?
Okay. So
you can only bring so many, right? How much nutrition did you bring with you?
Exactly. So I'll broaden. I'll say a little bit about nutrition. I take during the racing and training season.
It's not your fault.
It's all right. This is your second interview.
Well,
of the day,
my baby son was up with a toothache last night. So he was in my bed from 1 a.m. to
means that you weren't sleeping.
5:30 a.m.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so it's not your fault. I'm just a little sleepy.
Nutrition, it doesn't
nutrition.
make you want to jump up and
No,
dance,
I do like nutrition. I want to hear about it. Because I know you said you felt like you didn't really make the best choices.
Well, yeah, that's
nutritionally.
Right. So when the tour, before I flew over the Atlantic to start the tour, obviously I had to make sacrifices. And one thing I couldn't do is take all of my supplements that I normally take when I'm training for 63 days.
Yeah.
It'd just be ridiculous. And of course, I wasn't going to bring protein powder, for example, and make smoothies.
Bulky
I mean,
stuff.
I could, but I knew I had 10 weeks comfortably, and I was willing to push my ticket out 2 weeks more if I had to, so I could actually get to Istanbul, and I hope 12 would be maximum, given my other responsibilities in life. So I brought a little bit of most supplements, and they were gone by the time I got out of France, I would think. So, for example, branched-chain amino acids, L-glutamine, multivitamin, buffalo liver tablets from Carlson Labs, kind of an that's out there. But, one of the things...
Jana loves the sound of that.
That's a tip from a friend of mine in town.
What is that supposed to do for you? Buffalo liver.
Yeah, so it's a source of iron.
Oh.
And, of course, as an endurance athlete, and I would be an endurance athlete on this tour, even though there was no race involved, I was depleting. I was doing, I was taking the health of my red blood cells apart during the whole journey, technically, and these buffalo liver tablets help to protect me from those sorts of things.
Did you eat a lot of pate in France?
I did. I don't think I ate any pate.
What are you thinking? I mean, that's it right there.
My cat loves pate.
Oh, I bet. Oh, wow. Yeah, your cat eats pate. That's a healthy cat.
Fancy.
That's what they call it. That's what Royal Canine calls it, pate.
Huh.
We've talked a little bit about, I think, diet and nutrition at the studio. So you've been vegetarian before, is that right?
No, I have not.
Or
myself.
You were experimenting a little bit with that, or something.
For sure. Well, I dated my last relationship was with a nice woman from Hamburg, Germany, and she.
He just looked at the camera, all creepy. Hamburg,
nice
Germany.
Woman.
Yes, she's a good friend now. The Atlantic Ocean is a very difficult
way to navigate
piece of geography to have between two people in a relationship, it turns out. And a language barrier, too. But she's vegan.
Yes.
And so in that relationship, I often ate vegan, vegetarian, etc. And, of course, there's very strong reasons why all of us should at least minimize the meat in our diet and perhaps even remove it all together. But I haven't done that. But I eat my impression is I eat a lot less meat than the average American, which I think is probably easy to state. I eat it a few times a week. Portion size is generally a lot smaller than people would normally pile up on their plate. But the food on the tour, so I started with some nutritional supplements, and those were gone pretty quick. Otherwise,
so what would you eat like when you're in Scotland?
Yeah.
Say you're in Scotland, you're pedaling along.
Yeah.
You have like your morning. You get to lunchtime. You're like, I've just
get to lunchtime,
probably spent I probably spent
1,500
calories, 2,000 calories pedaling by that point.
Yeah. They have a lot of seafood in Scotland. I know, like a lot of salmon and things, I noticed.
Well, smoked salmon is, of course, just an amazing food. It's not only super healthy, but it's delicious, right?
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's also a bit pricey.
Yes.
And on these bike tours, I'm always threatening financial ruin by the end of them. So
what's the budget per day that you spend on food?
I didn't think much about the food part, but I did try to keep my how much per night to lodging? Under 40 a night when I was in everything west of the Balkans. And when I got to the Balkans, I tried to keep it under 25. The Balkans turned out to be much cheaper. I knew it based on conversation on the way there, and even before I left the United States, that the Balkans would be a lot cheaper, including Croatia. But to get there and discover it was really fabulous. For example, one number really stuck in my head. I think the cheapest night.
Jenna's about to fall asleep.
No, I'm fine. I'm fine.
$12.44.
It's just when you yawn it it just cultivates. But I'm totally in. I'm here.
Okay.
So
good.
Food-wise.
Yeah, Scotland.
So each night.
Scotland, goddammit, let's go to Scotland.
Sure. So in Scotland, I would start each day with food I bought the night before. So so like a carrot. It's always the same process. So it's always the same pattern. Typically, I shop. I'm riding along about 4:30. I pull over somewhere. I search for a place to stay. I figure out where it is roughly. I look at what's in between because I need a town big enough that it has a grocery store.
Yep.
I know what day it is during the week. So, by the way, Sunday is pretty tough in Europe. So you better. Sometimes I had to buy food for 2 days because Sunday everything is there, literally closed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's assume it's not a Sunday. So I book something, and then I find a town between where I'm going, or maybe the town itself if it's big enough, and then I dive into the supermarket, and super might be very small,
Right.
And I buy dinner, breakfast, and something at least to eat during the day. Maybe not necessarily lunch, but perhaps that too.
And what do those things look like?
A lot of bread.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, a lot of bread.
Like
cheese? Do you get those little things of cheese?
I tend to buy goat cheese because it's easier to digest.
I like goats.
I also use, at home, I didn't buy any goat milk on the road, of course, but I put goat milk in my coffee.
You're like, just drinking
Which
You're
seems
just
a little
milking
crazy.
goats. Hey, see that goat there? I can milk.
A variety of, hopefully, on the bio side. Bio in Europe is organic. But I would buy some, for example, some prosciutto ham or salami, a variety of mixed nuts I would buy, but never peanuts. I think peanuts are a bit rough on your system, for example, and neither cashews either. So almonds, walnuts, pecans,
Wow,
raisins.
this is all fascinating information. I had no idea about these things.
Cranberries. Go ahead. Sorry.
Did you ever get sick?
I did actually get one. I got a GI infection of some sort, and I think it was from something I ate from a deli, and I was in Bulgaria at the time. So let's see. Back to the
So you
buy vegetables. So for example, imagine like the guy's got a few carrots hanging out of his pocket, but more often,
See? I told you carrots.
So broccoli. There's this chemical in broccoli called sulforaphane.
Yeah.
Right? So it turns out sulforaphane is contributes to a lot of it upregulates genes in your body that helps clean your system out. So it's a super healthy vegetable, and you generally want to eat it raw unless you cook it, and then you can do you remember what we're sprinkling on it if you cook it?
It was you're talking about Rhonda Patrick's little
I learned some
thing,
of this
right?
from her for sure, yeah.
No, I don't remember what it is.
I have some of that too, but eat it raw. So you have to eat green vegetables in life, right?
In life, yeah.
So
can you tell my kid that? Can we do like a quick video where you just say you have to eat green vegetables in life?
So I ate a lot of broccoli. Sometimes I'd buy the smallest head of lettuce I could find, and I would just eat it. So what happens on the road? What happens when you're on a bike tour? You have to find ways to eat the nutrition. But yes, you're not going to be sitting down with a perfect meal each evening.
So are you like riding along with like a thing of lettuce, and you're like,
no,
just like
that I would
along?
eat at night.
Okay,
yeah, but I would have carrots and apples and other fruits in my pocket.
A lot of fiber.
Yeah, well, it certainly wasn't the only thing I was. I had I had a lot of bread, some of these meats, cheese.
Well, you have to kind of redefine your idea of what a meal is going to look like for you on the road. It's the same when you go vegan. You redefine your idea.
And then what was your
dinner.
what was your guilty pleasure? Were you like, ooh, Kit Kats?
Yeah, that's easy. Cappuccino. Now I tended. So what I would put in my pockets from the night before shop, or maybe 2 nights before, I would just pull out of my pockets and eat when I was riding.
Sure.
Sometimes I'd even have I'd have a sandwich I would buy.
Sure.
I'd make
I love a good pocket sandwich.
Nothing better than a good pocket sandwich.
Some tater tots.
But so to back up before my booking, I would leave typically at about 8:30 each morning, and I like to ride 50 miles before I stopped. Now, the morning light is the best, so I would stop to take a few pictures until about 10 o'clock. The light gets washed out. And then you're like, heck, okay, this is for me. I'm just going to absorb what I can, and I'm going to cap off the 50 and maybe push it to 60 miles, and then hopefully stop for a cappuccino, and then maybe dive into a bakery. In the UK, back in Scotland, you could go into a bakery for £1 and get these amazing meat pies. And the meat pie, it's a pastry. It's about
like
that
a hand pie.
Yeah, it's got, depending on the one, it might have some meat, potatoes, peas, etc.
I'm in.
And you eat one or two, and then you slide 2 or 3 in your pockets, and down the road you go. So lunch is, I generally ate it on the road. Oh, it's
pocket food.
Yeah.
Pocket food.
I love a good pocket meal.
So bakeries are a big part of my passion on the tour, and cappuccino was a big part of
Well, I love that. I mean, I think
my treats.
I travel for the geography, the nature aspect of it, and then I travel for the food. I mean, I'm married to a chef. I love to eat. I love to explore. I'll eat. I love to eat all sorts of new things. And so I love that you took the time to enjoy the food a little bit. I mean, going through all of these places. When I was in Scotland, one thing I found was the food was not... You don't go to Scotland for the food. It's a lot of... I remember
breakfast especially.
The breakfast is the worst. I remember getting blood sausage with beans and like roasted sliced tomatoes and like some haggis or something, and I was like, this is breakfast. And a lot of carrot soup for lunch and bread. But
were you vegan at the time?
No, I wasn't.
Okay.
But I still wouldn't eat the blood sausage. I've always been a little weird with meat.
Yeah, blood sausage.
It's so gross.
It's an interesting.
It is as it sounds.
Patty, right?
It's disgusting. But, I think that's part of the culture. Part of the immersion into another culture is food. Like, food is such a huge
Well, you talk about going through Italy, too, and, like, having pizzas on the side of the road.
Yeah.
Dude.
Yeah.
I mean, I bet it was fantastic.
So that middle-of-the-day meal, if I discovered something, such as in Bosnia, they have a variety of hearty pastries. Of different names, but you can go into the bakery and buy these things.
Is it like unidentified meat? It's like yak meat or something.
Mystery meat, we call that.
I think so. I think probably beef and lamb were primarily what was in these, but you could also get them just potato and spices, which are also, and cheese.
Yep.
And I ate all the above. I tend, in my normal life, the only dairy I consume is goat butter and goat milk. Because again, it's easier for your body to digest it.
You seem a little goaty. That makes sense.
Yeah, and I think goats are kind of cute, so it makes me smile when I.
There you go.
It's an acquired taste to have goat milk in your coffee.
It sure is.
But anyway, my impression.
Well, my sister has goats and milked them for years, and would give us gallons of goat's milk. I actually made baby formula out of goat's milk one time.
Neat.
For the baby.
Did they drink it?
Yeah, he drank it.
Okay.
Yeah. So goat's milk is like the closest to human milk.
Gotcha.
Oh, wow.
And it definitely made a difference when I switched to it.
Yeah, so I mean, how many calories do you think you take in a day?
Yeah, that's a popular question among friends that have asked me about the tour. And I have to guess, but I did work with a nutritionist a couple years ago, so I should be roughly accurate. I think 8,000 is a...
Whoa, what?
That's what you took in?
Yeah.
That's like my dream.
That's
to
so
eat
expensive.
8,000 calories
oh my
a day.
God. Yeah, especially when you're eating lettuce and carrots and stuff.
Well, so
like 3
often
calories.
Your body is craving hearty stuff.
Yeah.
Sure.
To eat that lettuce, I would honestly be like a little cranky about it. Like, I don't want to eat that. I want to eat the pizza.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, you want the salt and just the replenishment.
But I know, for example, if you're going to use the bathroom properly, you better get some fruits and vegetables in you.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting on the bike, which is not great for the process that goes on in your gut, I think, in general. You tend to be, pounding on yourself all day this way. So giving it a little assistance, just always, you like that. that there are some implications to putting a human being on a bicycle for 63 days.
Yeah, for sure.
Over a variety of surfaces. But in Italy, each village typically, some had nothing, of course, but
there's a pizzeria.
They had a pizzeria or two, and the way they do it there is they serve you. It's always It's none of this sharing pizza.
Right.
You get your own pizza, and
That's
they don't
the way
slice
it.
It. They give you a fork and a knife.
You should never share pizza.
You take it somewhere, and if you're the bike rider, you just consume it.
You fold it.
You're just like,
no, I think I just tear pieces off.
Yeah,
it is some of my happiest moments.
Look at how happy he is right now. He's like staring off into the abyss right now. Just
do you always love pizza? Is that a favorite food of yours? So it was even more rewarding to be there.
Pizza I stay away from in my normal life because I think gluten, there's plenty of evidence now that gluten is a gut irritant, causes gut leakage and a lot of problems like arthritis, right?
Totally.
So I try to stay away from it, and the same issues arise with traditional dairy from cows. But by the way, I have heard and read a little bit, I need to dig more into this, that the gluten content, or at least the irritant component of consuming, say, bread dough in Europe has much less of an impact on people than when they come to the United States.
Yeah, I've heard that as well.
So this is a very interesting
it's
anecdote. Or
there's a couple reasons for that, and part of it is because of the demand in the U.S., they've used these bromated flours to stretch the gluten to make it produce more. And it has become an irritant. My husband was the executive chef for Spoons for years, and they are really well known for their focaccia bread. Because it's all soup, and then they make all their sandwiches on focaccia. You can buy focaccia. And when he started there, the baker had this really intense rash all over his arms and hands. And so Ben started looking deeper into it and realized you're using this bromated flour. And he went on quite the journey to find a non-bromated organic flour, and it was not easy to find that wholesale and bulk here in the U.S. But in Europe, they don't add the bromated aspect. Europe is so much better in like that restricting of harmful chemicals and things in beauty products and food than here in America, and it's because
why don't you just move there then?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, why don't you just move
there
then?
Do these long distance, but it's so there is. I mean, there's an actual reality to that. I believe it. The bread you get here is just it's not good for you.
And it would. I think we would be we would all be disappointed if I didn't mention glyphosate, or AKA Roundup.
Yep.
Which in Europe is totally banned.
It is.
And in the United States we allow
it's in
not
everything.
only our neighbors to put Roundup on their dandelions, which by the way you can eat.
Yes. The greens.
Not anymore because they're all ground
up. Of course their kids go and roll around and it washes in the street but of course more of it is dumped on crops. It's a tragedy.
Oh, see, we're gonna get flagged. This is never gonna go.
Monsanto is gonna
be we're
shadow
gonna be
block
out.
us.
Yep, we're gonna get shadow blocked.
So where did you go from Italy? Where was the next?
From Italy. So eventually I crossed from Wales and England to Cherbourg, crossed France, eventually through the Jura Mountains, and then Lake Geneva.
Switzerland.
Then rode into Switzerland after a big problem with the bike, which I got fixed. Let's see, I'll almost get to Italy here. Then I rode into the Bernese Alps, which includes Mont Blanc and Eigen.
That was a really pretty portion of your photos.
Cool.
That was really neat. I was like, oh my gosh, she's in the
Alps.
Alps.
If anybody wants to check out, it's Here by Chance with periods in between.
Yep. That's the Instagram.
Great way to check out the Instagram of
it was pretty neat.
Our buddy Andre.
Yeah, that the various C's that I passed by in Switzerland and the mountains, of course, made for some unbelievable scenes, which some I captured on film in quality light, and many I didn't, because there's only so much of the day that you can that light
Stop
cooperates.
And
and then from Switzerland into Liechtenstein, which was also a selfish little part of the tour because I'd never been there, and also Austria because I hadn't been to Austria. And crossed Austria, and then in Innsbruck I turned south, and a few hours later I spent the night, and then the next morning I rode over Brenner Pass, and when I was at the top of Brenner I was in Italy. And so from Italy, then from there I rode south and southeast to Lake Garda, and eventually to a little village, Pedemonte, north of Verona, where I actually took the big. It was planned. I was going to take a big break somewhere in northern Italy, and I took it in Pedemonte. It turned out this place I had booked, it looked really good, but you never really know until you get there, you know. But this place, it turned out to be an active vineyard.
Oh, wow.
I want to say it was $33 a night.
That's sweet.
They had 2 rooms. The woman and her boyfriend were running it. Her ex-husband, by the way, was the manager, and he was there every day. Or maybe still husband. I'm not sure how all that was working, but it was a beautiful place. I was nestled literally within the comfort of thousands and thousands of rows and grapevines.
Oh, neat.
Cool.
And eventually I left there and I went east, across the top of Italy, across the top of the Adriatic Sea. And I rode, it turns out, back into the Alps.
Wow.
Up the Tagliamonte, I want to say was the name of the river. There's some images of it. It was really spectacular with the mountains behind. I rode up that drainage on one of the most spectacular bike ways I've ever seen or witnessed, for sure. It kept you off the main road, and it was through just a really special scenery, including a town called Dogna, by the way, which, of course, I want to say Dogma, but it's Dogna with an N.
Dogna.
Yeah,
Okay.
one of the villages along the way. And that, then I spent a night. I was very, very tired, but super grateful that night. I remember stopping at one point to eat an apple, even though I was so close. I was completely depleted, and I took a time out, basically. And it was getting dark, which is okay. But then I ended up at a supermarket, a pretty big place. And the next day, I rode into Slovenia, to answer your question. So, sorry, I took a
like
long
it.
route.
And what was the, tell us about the coldest time biking. It seems like the Alps, seems like that would be cold.
Yeah, I got really lucky in the Alps.
Yeah.
So it turned out the elements were hardest on me from Duncansby Head to Lismore in the south of Ireland.
Okay.
And then a little bit more of that, but by the time I got to the Normandy beaches, which was another little bonus for me and some place I would love to see, and now I went to Omaha Beach and to Utah Beach.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very. What do you do at a space like that? I
don't know.
I wasn't sure, so I went there and paid my respects and did some thinking and then carried on. I can only stay in these places for so long, but my favorite part of that was the morning when I left. I rolled down to Omaha Beach, and I had the whole place to myself, and the sun came up over the ocean, and there was a cloud layer. If you held your finger out, it was, finger thickness, the clouds above the sea. So the clouds were really close. But the sun came up for that moment and shone through on the memorial. And I took some pictures of that. But standing there on the beach in that morning light by myself, thinking about what happened there was really special.
Yeah, that's intense.
I just listened to a podcast about, and the guest was the architect who designed and built the memorial in New York City for the Twin Towers. And Deepak Chopra was interviewing him about what is kind of like the concept when you're thinking about creating a memorial for a space like that. And that's the reaction that they're looking for, is like that moment of remembrance and like acknowledgement, but also that it should be very moving, like emotionally. And I just think the energy that's there, you know, it's a charged, very charged area. So I got
so lucky that morning there wasn't one bus motor. There wasn't even a voice.
Yeah,
I was able to stand in the sand alone and absorb that. And then I rode from the beach into a small village along the sea. And then I started to climb. And as I climbed, I climbed past bunkers. The whole scene was that. I'm so happy that I took a. So I do make exceptions to the site. So people often, when they go on trips, they say, I saw this, I saw that, I saw this. You know, this is an American tradition. What did you see? Well, I saw this and that. I think there can be a lot more to a journey. And some of that is what I love is the people that I meet along the way.
Yeah.
And that, by the way, is why I decided to keep the bivy sack in the pannier most of the time, because I was finding inexpensive lodging. If I'm out for 10 weeks, inexpensive, it's got to be below $50 or I'm going to financial ruin, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I was finding lodging typically under 40 and then 20-ish in the Balkans. So I knew I could survive as long as I got to Istanbul within 10 weeks on that budget. And what it allowed me to do, which for me was maybe even more of a third of the journey that I would celebrate now, is it allowed me to go into people's homes that really needed the money.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
Because these aren't expensive hotels. And they welcomed me in and educated me, some more than others, the peak of that.
Yeah.
Or I got to just sit and spend time with them and become, I became immersed in their space.
Yeah.
And they weren't necessarily, they weren't up at the podium educating me, but just to be in their space was a special opportunity. And for example, I arrived at Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. I had a lot of concerns about Bosnia. A lot of them, I found that when you ride into a new country, by the way, it takes me about 2 days to come down completely.
Sure.
And then it's normal. You feel, okay, whatever that anxiety was. And it's not high anxiety. It's just a little something
it's just
for me.
different. And
for others, it would be higher. But for me, within 2 days, I settle in. I wasn't, so I was around there when I got to Sarajevo, second, third day maybe. And I spent one night there, and then the next night I shifted to another place. And I ended up, and I'll make the story super short.
I gotta call. I gotta do. I'm sorry.
It's all right. Good. So, should I finish the story?
Yeah, finish the story.
Okay.
Yeah,
so, as we all know, in the 90s, the Serbian army in particular surrounded Sarajevo, the Bosnians in Sarajevo, and they, for 4 or 5 years, they used tanks and other war machines to throw bombs down into the city, and they killed a lot of civilians, and there was conflict with the Bosnian army, of course. The father was in the army. The son, who gave me a tour of the town, he was born during the war.
Wow.
And so back to the father, he had coffee with me. He made me Turkish coffee, Bosnian coffee, every morning, and we sat. We didn't get to talk every morning, but we spoke quite a lot, and I developed a friendship with him, and I developed a friendship with his son. And in this process, I learned so much about Yugoslavia, not just Bosnia.
Right.
So that you can't do that in a hotel for $350 a night.
No.
And you can't do that in a bivy sack for $0. Although, camping, I did it in my 20s. That's another part of my story. I did it a lot. So that's just another reason why I kind of move away from it. There's a lot to discover on the camping end of things, of course. But the hotel, just a little square that you hide away in, that's, in my opinion, it's certainly not worth the money. But I really enjoyed meeting people on the tour.
That
was
neat.
one of the examples, and there are dozens.
Being part of the cultures. And
yeah.
So I know you're probably still processing, and in our last episode you talked about that moment, where you finally crossed the
Bosphorus,
the Bosphorus. now that you've had a little more time, what are you still taking away from this process?
Well, I think the tour gives back to me every day. And I think that'll be the case for the rest of my life. It's pushed my perspectives out on everything. I'll give you one example. I was just thinking about it on my bike. I was on the bike today for a few hours training. Now I'm back to training for the next racing season. I was thinking about the trash that I began to encounter, sadly in Bosnia, pullouts, which by the time I was approaching Istanbul was a stream on both sides. But even worse was the air pollution. And I developed a bit of a sore throat by the time I got to Bulgaria.
Oh, man.
I think because as a cyclist, you're processing an enormous amount of atmosphere, right? But I also was noticing the quality of so there was something in the airspace, a smog or something. And I wasn't sure. Some of it's smoke. They tend to burn a lot in those countries. But the point I would like to make is we are paying a price for our reluctance to be a little bit modest in this country. In this town, we have lost touch with the concept of modesty and the value for all living things on planet Earth. And we have got to wake up. And what I discovered on this tour was the wall of the implication. It's coming. It's going to arrive in Europe. It's going to spread around the globe. It already does in smaller quantities. People are puzzled why everyone gets cancer, right? We are making a choice right now. It hasn't arrived to our doorsteps in America, but it's there. And if you ride a bike from the west to the east of the European subcontinent, you will ride into this stuff and recognize, hopefully, that it's coming. So that changed my perspective on the next time I buy a cell phone, right? And that'll be with me forever. So that's one example.
That's interesting.
Of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, man. That's really powerful, too. Well, I think it would be neat to do it again. I think as you unravel the situation, I think it's definitely more check-ins are required. So what's your next step?
Yeah, well, I'm moving to Durango to work with a coach with more depth and experience than anybody I've worked with before. So that's a part of my life that's racing, training and racing a mountain bike. And I'm now planning my next tour, which for this podcast would probably be the most interesting thing. So the season, again, will end for me roughly middle of August. Within 10 days, I anticipate flying to Paris is my idea. Now, this could change. I got a little time to change this, right? But back to Europe, because if you're going to train and race for 10 months, you don't have a lot of time to plan. So I would like to go, for example, from the top of Norway to Cape Town. That's one idea that I have. And even more so, I want to ride from probably Paris to Kathmandu, but I want to go through Tibet. Imagine the visas you need for those and the shots and the planning, right? Since I'm racing, I'm going to sacrifice those ideas and instead do something I think is really cool, and I'm going to circumnavigate Europe. I'm calling it Europa 360. It'll include a tour around the Baltic Sea, for example, and of course a much longer story. But that's what's coming next fall.
Oh, man.
And if somebody wants to sign up for that tour, they go to...
If they, they want to sign up,
I'm just kidding.
Send me a text
message.
Well, we need somebody to follow you around and document it.
That's for sure.
So that we can put it on Netflix.
So no more handheld cameras off my handlebar.
So you can show those things that you saw and show the rest of the world what you see.
Well, I'm working now with a marketing agent.
You are. Weird.
Oh.
He's very close to me at the moment.
Interesting.
Oh.
And we are going to try to, for two reasons. I want to make what I'm doing more visible.
Yes.
Because I want to inspire people to get a little bit more.
The more people you can reach, the more you can inspire
out of their lives, right?
For sure.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be a tour across Europe. It can be very simple. I just want to be a part of the community that says, look, there's much more that you can do in your life. You're going to feel better. You're going to encourage other people to do the same. And in the conclusion, it's selfish for me, I think, but I've always wanted to do something good for planet Earth,
Yeah.
for biodiversity. And I think if people feel good,
Yep.
their neighbors feel good, their neighbors feel good, right? And that is contagious. That's what I'm trying to spread with my cycling. But I also, I need to survive.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And financial ruin is typically what happens each year, and I recover. So I'm hoping to attract some, maybe some partnerships and some sponsors to help me with this next tour moving forward. So Ken's
totally doable.
Ken's on it.
Help me with
I'm
that.
on it.
I love it. Well, we wish you the best of luck
Yeah.
in Durango.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll check in with you, and
Hope so.
we'll have you back on.
Keep us posted.
Be great.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for watching
you.
Ciao.
once again. Bye.